The sun hovered just above the horizon, spilling molten gold across the glassy surface of Lake Fairwood. Mist drifted lazily over the water, curling around the reeds and the jagged rocks that lined the shore. The world seemed to hold its breath here, as if time itself respected this little slice of paradise I had inherited from my father. I, Colton Mercer, had grown up wandering the banks of this lake, casting lines into its depths, feeling the rough wood of my rowboat beneath my palms, and listening to the wind hum through the pines. This was my sanctuary. A place where the noise of the world, traffic, deadlines, HOA letters faded into irrelevance. That peace shattered with the shrill buzz of my phone. At first, I ignored it, assuming it was a routine message. But when the screen flashed the number I knew by heart, my own direct line, I froze. A chill skated down my spine. My stomach tightened. Why would my own number call me? I answered, keeping my voice calm despite the sudden knot of unease in my chest. Colton Mercer. The voice that came back was hurried, clipped, and tinged with panic. Sir, this is Officer Daniels with Cedar Ridge Dispatch. We received a 911 call about you trespassing on your property. I blinked, staring across the lake, the oars resting idle in my hands. Trespassing, on my property? The words tasted like iron in my mouth. Yes, sir. A neighbor, a representative of the HOA, reported a disturbance and claimed you were refusing to leave the lake area. They requested immediate intervention. My fingers tightened around the phone. The HOA. Margaret Hawthorne. I'd paid my dues for 15 years, followed every rule, and had maintained every inch of this property. And now they had escalated petty disagreements to a level that bordered on absurdity. Dispatch, I said, forcing my voice into authoritative calm, you're telling me the call came directly to me? Yes, sir. You're the designated emergency contact for the property. The caller didn't realize it would route to you directly. We've confirmed your identity and verified the details. I ran a hand over my face, trying to shake off the disbelief. My sanctuary, my lake, was suddenly the epicenter of bureaucratic chaos. And the absurdity of it all made my blood boil. By the time I hauled the rowboat onto the shore, the crisp morning air did little to calm my racing thoughts. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I strode toward my pickup, my mind already planning the confrontation. Lake Fairwood was my heritage. It was my peace, my refuge, and I would not allow a clipboard-wielding bureaucrat to take it from me. The black SUV waited at the edge of my driveway, parked haphazardly like an intruder daring me to confront it. Out stepped Margaret Hawthorne, the HOA president, radiating authority in her crisp blazer, clipboard clutched tightly against her chest. Her perfectly polished smile did little to hide the calculating gleam in her eyes. Colton, she called, her voice carrying across the gravel and reeds. We need to discuss your use of the lake. Residents are concerned it's not permitted under current HOA guidelines. I slammed the truck door shut, taking a slow step forward. Margaret. Let me clarify something. This lake is on my property. I own every inch of it. Every fee, every tax, every maintenance detail has been handled responsibly. And yet, you called 911 to remove me from my own property? Her smile faltered, but her posture remained rigid. The board received complaints about disturbances and potential hazards. As president, I'm obligated to act on behalf of the community. I laughed, bitter and low, my hands flexing at my sides. Obligated? You mean you panicked. You assumed authority you don't have and escalated a private disagreement to a criminal-level emergency. You didn't think about who you were calling. Margaret took a step back, a subtle flicker of doubt crossing her features. Colton, this isn't personal. We're just following protocol. Residents. Protocol? I interrupted, my voice rising with controlled fury. Calling 911 about a homeowner on his own property is not protocol. It's harassment. And now, not only have you embarrassed yourself, you've directly challenged me. That was a mistake. She straightened, forcing the smile back onto her face, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her. Colton, we simply want to ensure the safety and harmony of the neighborhood. This lake. I cut her off, stepping closer, voice low and measured, dangerous in its precision. "This lake has been my family's for generations. And I will not allow bureaucracy, fear, or petty complaints to dictate who may or may not enjoy it. You wanted action, Margaret. You got my attention. But know this, I will be at the next board meeting. And you'll find I'm more prepared than you imagined." Margaret opened her mouth, then closed it. She pivoted, returning to her SUV without another word. I watched her go, a mixture of adrenaline and satisfaction surging through me. I climbed into my truck, the engine rumbling to life like a heartbeat, and drove down the winding gravel road. My mind was alive with strategy. The HOA had underestimated me. They thought a phone call could intimidate a Mercer. They were wrong. Dead wrong. By the time I returned to the edge of my property, the mist had thickened, wrapping the lake in a ghostly cloak. The water reflected the morning sun in fractured golds and silvers, the surface broken only by the occasional ripple of a fish or the landing of a bird. The lake seemed almost to watch me, waiting, patient and timeless. I stepped out, letting my boots sink into the wet sand, and drew in a deep breath. The smell of pine and damp earth filled my lungs. Lake Fairwood was more than water and land. It was memory, legacy, and life. And now it had become a symbol, a line in the sand I was willing to defend with everything I had. I sat for a long moment on the weathered dock, staring at the water, thinking about the upcoming confrontation. I would not be bullied by rules written by people who had never rowed a boat, cast a fishing line, or walked these banks alone at sunrise. The HOA had called 911, thinking they were enforcing order. Instead, they had awakened a storm. The call, of course, had come straight to my desk. And for the first time in years, I felt the raw power of knowing exactly who I was, what I owned, and what I was willing to fight for. The lake rippled gently, as if acknowledging the shift. I stood, brushing the mist from my jacket, and took one last look at the horizon. Somewhere, beyond the water and the pines, the HOA was plotting their next move, unaware that I was already 2 steps ahead. Lake Fairwood would remain mine. The battle was just beginning, but one thing was clear, I was not afraid. Not anymore. The fluorescent lights of the Cedar Ridge Community Center buzzed softly as I stepped into the room, my boots clicking against the polished linoleum. The hum of murmured conversations filled the air, an uneasy mixture of curiosity, concern, and the faint trace of judgment. I had arrived early, as always, preferring to stake my claim and take measure of the space before the inevitable storm. Lake Fairwood had been my sanctuary, but today it was a battlefield, and the enemy, though cloaked in civility, was about to realize they had underestimated me. Board members trickled in, one by one, their polite nods and clipped hellos masking the tension that lingered just beneath their calm facades. I recognized most of them: Harold Jennings, the accountant who liked rules more than people, Lila Monroe, the soft-spoken secretary with a habit of smiling at inappropriate moments, and of course, Margaret Hawthorne, the HOA president, whose polished appearance betrayed a kind of calculated ferocity. She arrived last, stepping into the room like a general inspecting her troops, clipboard in hand and eyes scanning for signs of weakness. The chairs were arranged in a semicircle around a long table, the polished wood gleaming under the sterile lighting. I chose a seat near the center, not at the head, not at the corner, just enough to command attention without seeming confrontational. Margaret took the seat at the far end, the board members flanking her like a protective phalanx. "Meeting will come to order," Margaret began, her voice steady but tinged with the faint edge of nervousness. "We're here to discuss concerns regarding the lake at the Mercer Ranch property. Multiple complaints have been filed, and as per HOA regulations, it is our responsibility to review and address them." I listened carefully, letting the initial statements wash over me. Safety concerns. Aesthetic complaints. Disturbances. Each one was a familiar refrain, each one a misrepresentation or exaggeration. The HOA had prepared a dossier, thick with anecdotal grievances and selective photographs, all designed to cast me as a negligent or troublesome neighbor. When Margaret finally paused, I rose, the creak of my boots on the floor slicing through the room's tension. I let my gaze drift over the board members, letting them feel the weight of my presence before speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice calm, deliberate, and edged with the authority of ownership, "I appreciate that community concerns must be heard. But let us not confuse diligence with overreach. The lake, the surrounding property, and the Mercer Ranch itself are legally mine. The deeds are a matter of public record. Every fee, every tax, every maintenance requirement has been met responsibly and on time. Yet here we are, summoned to explain my existence on my own property as though it were an affront to the HOA. A ripple of murmured surprise traveled around the room. Margaret's smile tightened, a subtle quiver betraying her composure. I allowed myself a measured pause, letting the silence draw attention to the absurdity of the accusations. Yesterday, I continued, my tone sharpening, an HOA representative saw fit to call 911. 911, about me. A homeowner on his own land. This is not a matter of community safety, it is a matter of bureaucratic overreach. And it is unacceptable. Eyes flicked nervously among the board members. I could see the doubt creeping into their expressions, the first cracks in the facade of unanimous authority. Margaret's voice finally broke through, thin but deliberate. Colton, the board simply acts on behalf of the community. There are guidelines that must be followed. We cannot ignore complaints, and safety is a paramount concern. I shook my head slowly. Safety? Let's talk about safety. The lake is properly maintained. I've commissioned independent inspections. Life vests are available. There are clear signage and restricted areas. Every conceivable precaution has been taken. Yet, you chose panic over dialogue, escalation over reason, and assumed authority you do not possess. I began pacing slowly in front of the table, letting my words punctuate the space like sharp stones hitting water. I am not here to argue aesthetics or subjective discomfort. I am here to assert a principle far more important than opinions or fears: property rights, legal ownership, and mutual respect. My family's land is not a playground for your misinformed interpretations of rules. Harold Jennings, the accountant, cleared his throat. Mr. Mercer, some residents have expressed that the lake activity, it's disruptive. Perhaps you could consider restrictions. Restrictions? I snapped, though my voice remained controlled, simmering rather than erupting. I am already in compliance with every HOA rule that applies to my property. I have abided by every regulation, paid every fee, and yet your board assumes authority over a private matter. You mistake inconvenience for violation, perception for law. That is the issue here. I produced a thick binder from under my arm, placing it carefully on the table. I brought documentation. Tax records. Deeds. Correspondence. Safety inspections. Every piece of evidence that validates not just my compliance, but my diligence, my integrity, and my right to maintain this property as I see fit. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. She glanced at the binder, her fingers tightening around her pen. She had thought the board's presentation would intimidate me, that bureaucratic procedures would overpower my resolve. She was wrong. One by one, I continued, flipping through the pages deliberately, I will demonstrate that the complaints filed are either misinformed, exaggerated, or entirely fabricated. And when this is complete, I expect the board to recognize the gravity of their overreach, and for the HOA to commit to respectful, lawful interaction going forward. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, whispering quietly. Lila Monroe, the secretary, avoided eye contact entirely, tapping her pen nervously against her notebook. Margaret's posture was rigid, but I could see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, the first acknowledgement that the Mercer name carried weight she had underestimated. The meeting stretched on. I methodically presented the documentation, countering every complaint with facts, photographs, receipts, and independent reports. The room, once tense with anticipation of confrontation, now simmered with a different energy of recognition. Recognition that the Mercer Ranch was not simply a property to be regulated at whim, but a legacy defended with precision and patience. Finally, Margaret spoke, her voice tight but controlled. Colton, while the points you've made are compelling, the board still has an obligation to the community. Perhaps we can find a compromise? I shook my head slowly. Compromise implies that I am in the wrong. I am not. This meeting should not be about negotiation, it should be about acknowledgement of fact. Respecting my rights does not diminish the community, it reinforces the integrity of the HOA itself. You called 911. You escalated a non-issue to a crisis. You owe not compromise, but understanding and correction. Another long pause settled over the room. The clock ticked loudly against the wall, marking each second as the board members digested the evidence, the calm fury, and the unwavering determination that filled the space. In the end, they had no choice. The board reluctantly agreed to withdraw the previous warnings and to engage in a mediated discussion, designed to clarify boundaries and responsibilities without resorting to overreach. Margaret, meanwhile, avoided my gaze, a subtle acknowledgement of defeat that pride would not allow her to voice. Walking back to my truck under the dim streetlights, I felt adrenaline ebbing, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of justice served. I had not raised my voice unnecessarily, nor had I threatened retaliation. I had relied on facts, patience, and unwavering confidence in the truth. And that had won the day. The lake awaited me back home, its surface smooth and reflective under the twilight. The pines whispered with the wind, and the distant hoot of an owl punctuated the growing night. Lake Fairwood, my sanctuary, remained mine not by luck or threat, but by the steadfast assertion of rights and the quiet power of preparation. As I approached the water, a soft ripple disturbed its surface. I traced the line of reflection back to the horizon, thinking of the next steps. The HOA had learned a lesson, but I remained vigilant. One misstep could spark another unnecessary confrontation. Lake Fairwood had survived the storm, but the true test of balance between neighborly oversight and property rights was ongoing. And I was ready. The lake shimmered under the growing moonlight, a mirror to the sky, a stage set for calm and for caution. The battle had been won today, but vigilance, patience, and respect for the rules of both law and nature would ensure that Lake Fairwood remained untouchable for years to come. And I would remain its guardian. Weeks passed like the slow, deliberate drift of clouds across Lake Fairwood. The mornings carried the crisp scent of pine and damp earth, but the tension that had gripped my property began to ease, replaced by a cautious sense of equilibrium. The HOA board had learned, the hard way, that the Mercer Ranch was not a place for bureaucratic overreach. And yet, even with the formalities settled, I remained vigilant. Trust, once fractured, took longer to rebuild than I would ever admit aloud. The lake, my sanctuary, had reclaimed its serenity. The mist rose gently at dawn, curling around the reeds and stones, and the soft splash of fish breaking the surface reminded me that life went on, uninterrupted by the petty squabbles of men and women with clipboards. I walked along the dock each morning, barefoot, letting the cold water lap against my feet. The familiar creak of the wood beneath me and the faint scent of wet timber grounded me. This was mine, always had been, and most importantly, I had defended it. One afternoon, as the sun hung low and golden over the treetops, a sharp ping from my laptop drew me back inside. The screen glowed with an urgent message from the HOA. My stomach tightened, not with fear, but with anticipation. Their previous antics had left me wary. I opened the email carefully, expecting another volley of thinly veiled threats or procedural minutiae. Instead, I found something wholly unexpected, a formal acknowledgement of my property rights, a written apology for the escalation, and a detailed plan for cooperation on shared responsibilities along the lake. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly, feeling the weight of weeks of tension finally lift. The email bore Margaret Hawthorne's signature. She had signed it herself, neat and precise, a small but significant admission that the board had erred. The words were formal, yes, but the underlying message was clear. The HOA had recognized their mistake, and the era of arbitrary harassment was over. I allowed myself a small, rare smile. This was victory, not through conflict, but through persistence and clarity. Lake Fairwood had not only survived, it had been vindicated. Later, I wandered down to the water, the golden light of sunset reflecting like molten amber across the lake's surface. I dipped my fingers into the cool water, watching the ripples fan outward, merging and disappearing into the vast stillness. It struck me then that the lake was more than a refuge, it was a teacher. Life, like this water, was rarely still. It could be turbulent, unpredictable, even threatening. And yet, patience, vigilance, and careful navigation could restore balance to even the roughest currents. Margaret's voice broke through the quiet, tentative and unsure. Colton, she emerged from the gravel path, her blazer slightly rumpled from her walk, eyes lowered in a rare moment of humility. We owe you an apology. The call, the escalation, it shouldn't have happened. I hope moving forward, we can work together rather than against each other. I studied her silently, sensing a sincerity that had been absent in our previous encounters. Pride had forced her to act as an adversary, but this was something different: recognition and, perhaps, respect. I allowed myself a nod, slow and deliberate. Margaret, I said, voice calm, measured, that's all I ever wanted. Respect. Communication. Understanding. If we can manage that, this lake can be a place of peace for everyone, including you. She nodded, a faint smile crossing her face, a truce in the making. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to imagine a future where neighborly disputes didn't escalate into crises, where the HOA could act with reason instead of panic. It was an image that seemed almost fragile against the backdrop of the lake's enduring calm. As she retreated toward the community center, I turned back to the water, allowing the silence to embrace me. The lake shimmered in the last rays of the sun, reflecting the sky in perfect symmetry. For the first time in weeks, I felt a profound sense of relief, not just for myself, but for the enduring spirit of the land. The Mercer Ranch had endured. It had survived bureaucracy, miscommunication, and the impulsive actions of those who had underestimated it. And it had done so because I had remained steadfast. That evening, I sat on the dock long after the sun had disappeared, the horizon painted with streaks of violet and gold. Fireflies began to dance among the reeds, tiny sparks of light against the darkening landscape. The occasional splash of a fish breaking the water's surface echoed in the quiet, a reminder of life continuing in its unhurried rhythm. I realized then that victory, true victory, was not measured by confrontation or dominance. It was measured by patience, vigilance, and the unshakable defense of what was rightfully yours. Later, I walked the perimeter of the lake, flashlight in hand, checking the docks, the signage, and the boundaries that had once been points of contention. Everything was in order. The breeze ruffled my hair, carrying the scent of pine and wet soil. The world outside seemed distant, inconsequential. Here, at the edge of my property, I was in command. Not through intimidation or force, but through stewardship, knowledge, and unwavering resolve. As the moon rose high, casting silver light across the still water, I leaned against the railing of the dock and allowed myself one final reflection. The HOA had called 911, believing that fear and procedure could overpower resolve. They had not counted on the fact that the call came straight to my desk or that I would respond with preparation, patience, and unwavering confidence. Lake Fairwood had not been claimed, it had been defended, with dignity intact. I watched the moonlight ripple across the water, tracing lines of silver that twisted and merged with the darkness. The lake seemed to whisper its approval, a quiet acknowledgement that the land and water, the legacy and the effort, had been preserved. In that moment, I understood something fundamental: life, like the lake, required attention, care, and vigilance. Disturbances would come, storms would rise, and conflict was inevitable, but what mattered most was how one responded. I straightened, brushing the last traces of mist from my jacket, and took one long, deep breath. The horizon was clear, the lake calm, and the ranch secure. The confrontation was over, and the ripples had settled into perfect equilibrium. My sanctuary had survived not because it was untouched by challenge, but because it had been defended with clarity, courage, and an unwavering commitment to what was mine. Lake Fairwood would remain a haven for all who respected it, but one truth was undeniable: it belonged to me. And any who doubted that fact would learn, as the HOA had, that some boundaries were not to be crossed. As the night settled, stars emerging one by one in the dark velvet sky, I finally allowed myself to relax fully. The Mercer Ranch was safe. The lake was tranquil. And the lessons of persistence, patience, and steadfastness had etched themselves into the very soil and water that defined this land. Tomorrow, life would continue. But tonight, I let the silence, the shimmering water, and the stillness of Lake Fairwood remind me that some victories were absolute, not in the force applied, but in the vigilance maintained. And as I finally turned back toward the house, leaving the dock and the lake bathed in moonlight, I knew one thing with certainty: no one, no matter how bold or bureaucratic, would ever take this sanctuary from me again.